Okay, welcome to tonight's New York Giants Preservation Society meeting for Thursday, February 8th. Tonight we have James Elfers. James wrote a book a few years back, The Tour to End All Tours, the story of Major League Baseball, 1913 to 1914 World Tour. And it'll be speaking mostly about the Giants during that. Some housekeeping. There'll be no meeting next week. All spend time with your loved ones for Valentine's Day. This way nobody will get mad at you.
Yeah.
In 2 weeks, we will have James 4. James contributed to the 1951 New York Giant book. He'll be speaking about Al Corwin. And if his name seems familiar to you, he's also writing a book about Candlestick Park memories that I think a lot of you contributed to. So
Al Corwin's real name is Elmer.
Okay, thank you. Last Saturday, I spent up in Cooperstown talking about our group, my book, Mlb'S. So I just want to thank a few people who attended. Jim Falkerts, Mike Hauser, Rich Sternberg, the Hall of Fame president, Josh Rawich, Maury Bouchard, who's on tonight, Bruce Markison, and of course, the great judge, Jim Mully. I want to thank them for showing up and supporting me. If anybody happens to be up there in late May, I'll be reprising my role. I was asked to speak at the Cooperstown Symposium, and I plan on doing that. And again, that'll be about the book and about the great group that we have here. So I want to also thank all the people who sent their donations. I'll be sending it out this weekend. And incredible as it seems, we did raise $2,424.24. Jim Weber is on tonight. He kicked in $57. Otherwise, there was no shenanigans here. That's really with Jim's money, that's exactly what it came out to be. So thank you all for donating. And thank you, Jim, for putting us at that exact number. I sent out a video recapitulation, so to speak, this morning on what occurred during Willie Mays Day from the time the idea came to start until Sunday when it ended. And again, I included this group, Hall of Fame, Adam Swig, the Giants, etc. I'm going to two more things. Bill Klink asked me if I could get a copy of the proclamation if people would be able to buy it. I read it this morning and I sent out the language, and I actually called City Hall in San Francisco, and they said they would send me a copy of it where it was, and they sent me exactly what I sent you guys, but they are going to call me back to see if possibly Bill wanted to put it in his cabin. It'd probably be a nice thing. Don't know how much it is, but I'm hoping they get back to me, and I will report to you on what it's done. Before we turn it over to James, I would like Paul Ellis Graham to speak. Paul came up with a great idea, and I think we should maybe investigate it, and we could talk about it after the meeting tonight. Paul, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you, Gary. After the wonderful program last week, where we all shared our memories and the importance of Willie Mays in our lives as individuals and as members of the New York Giants Baseball Preservation Society, I was thinking that after Gary had published his memories of being a Giants fan, that maybe because of all the special connections and the wonderful stories that we all had to Willie Mays, that we think of getting those published in a book. You know, of taking the video that was done and gathering everybody's stories and having a little intro about who they are and where they live and how they, of course, it'd be self-explanatory how people became fans of the Giants and of Willie, and then thinking of getting that published. And when we talked, Gary and I talked today, if we were able to do something like that, then maybe we could take some of the proceeds, certainly from the book. And, if we have any, I was thinking if we had any expenses, although I don't think we have that many, but we could make a donation also to the Say Hey Foundation and use that money to further the cause in Willie's behalf.
We'll discuss that later. Whoever wants to talk about that, Paul emailed me during the week, and he loved the show that we had. Of course, if any of this would happen, it would have to be emailed. I'm not going to listen to that 3-hour, 10-minute thing last week and write down what everybody said. Everybody would have to send in their piece. We'd have to come up with a catchy name and so on and so forth. But we'll discuss that. I don't want to interfere with the program tonight. We'll talk about that later. But tonight we reintroduced James Elfers. James had spoke earlier, actually late in the 2023. This is a book he wrote, The Tour to End All Tours, the story of Major League Baseball's 1913 to 14 World Tour. It's gonna, talk about it, but mostly talk about the part with where the Giants were involved. James, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, could you imagine imagine you're a ball player in 1912 and you hear about what's gone down in a bar room in Chicago where John McGraw and Charles Comiskey have decided to take their baseball teams on a tour around the world. Wouldn't you want to get in on that action, particularly because you're doing it where you're paying no money to go and you could be taken around the world for and playing baseball, the game you love? I mean, anyway, what happened was that's exactly what happened. It was coming up on the 25th anniversary of Albert Goodwill Spalding's World Tour of 1889, and both Comiskey and McGraw despised Spalding enormously. So they decided that they were going to do a tour of their own, and they were going to do Spalding better. So they met in the back of a bar room in Chicago while McGraw was doing a vaudeville routine. He was doing lectures on baseball. And he was in Chicago for that, and he and Comiskey got together and they roped in the manager of the White Sox, Jimmy Callahan, as the third person to give so there were three people paying money to go for the tour. So they the whole 1912 season is colored by what's going to happen in 1913. And among the things that happen are we have in the summer of 1912, Jim Thorpe wins his gold medals. In July, he loses them. In August, he signed up with the New York Giants. And a good reason he was signed by the New York Giants is because John McGraw understood that if he won the propaganda war with Charles Comiskey, no matter how he did on this tour as far as games went, he would come out the winner as far as who won the games. So you had Jim Thorpe's first international exposure after losing his tour. You had the Giants and White Sox barnstorming across the United States 2 weeks after the World Series. The Giants lost the World Series to the A's. Then they go barnstorming across the United States. They play in all kinds of places, including Blue Rapids, Kansas, which then and now had about 1,000 people in it, which bloomed to 30,000 people for the day as they all came in to watch the game. They made their way to the West Coast, and the Giants played their very first game in San Francisco. The specific date is let me see here. Oxnard, San Diego. Actually, they played their actual game on 16th November 1913. The Giants played their first game in San Francisco. It was actually part of a doubleheader. They played the first game in the morning in Oakland, California, and played an afternoon game in San Francisco. It was the very first time the Giants ever played in San Francisco. The game was they actually won the game in San Francisco. Nope. They lost in San Francisco to the Giants 4-2. But it was the first time the Giants ever been in San Francisco. So it's kind of interesting that this is that's where they would end up after their move in 1954. They then get aboard a ship, the Empress of Japan, which was they took a train to Canada, ended out leaving out of Canada They got in a ship called the Empress of Japan, which promptly ran into the worst typhoon in that section of the Pacific in the last 25 years. The ship nearly sank. They had they were taking water fore and aft. They were so far. The wind was so bad they were blown three days backwards, and they ended up coming into Tokyo 3 days late. 3 games were originally scheduled for Japan. They only ended up playing 2 because they lost all that time in transit. They played a game in Tokyo on, ironically, December 7th, 1913, and they played 2 games in Japan. They went to China. They were going to play in Shanghai, but it rained. They played a game in Hong Kong. They went to the Philippines. They went to Sri Lanka and played a game and met Sir Thomas Lipton, the richest man in the world. They went to Egypt and played a game in front of the last Khedive of Egypt. They went to Nice, France, and played a game in France. They went to Italy where they couldn't play a game. They went to Rome. They couldn't play a game in Italy because they could not find a place suitable to play in Rome. They went to Nice, France. They went to Paris where it rained, so they didn't play in Paris. And then they played their last game in front of 20,000 fans, including George V, before they sailed home on the Lusitania 18 months before it sank and were completely forgotten about by history. Now, how's that grab you? So basically, my book was the first book written on this tour in 90 years. There were several books came out in 1914, but nothing in the interim years. Why did this happen? This is the single most expensive, single most successful, geographically the widest tour ever for a baseball tour. Why did it disappear for history? Couple of things. First and foremost is the Federal League. While Comiskey and McGraw are out of the country, the Federal League starts up. And when the Federal League starts up, that drew a lot of the headlines of 1914. The Federal League drew all the headlines in 1914 and 1915. And the other thing that probably did it was the Miracle Braves of Boston also took a lot of the headlines. But this was a tour that was unlike any other because you had many players who were on their honeymoon. One of the reasons it was called the Honeymoon Express by the press as well as the tourists. It was also called the Honeymoon Express because you had many couples who were newly married who chose to delay their weddings until they could go on a honeymoon. And it's hard to blame them because what they got was to see the world on their honeymoon and to play baseball. And that's exactly what they did. This is the tour of their events. You had many. For example, I was able to get Jim Thorpe's wife's Iva's diary. I had access to his family gave me her diary, and to give you an idea of how bad things went between Jim and Iva, Iva divorced Jim. The divorce was so bitter, she cut his picture out of every house in the house, cut his face out of every picture in the house, and never referred to him as anything other than that man. Yet she saved this diary from when they were in love. And in the diary, I was able to find out what hotels they stayed in, all kinds of things. I was able to give the Thorpes back a memory they'd never had, that of their parents in love. And they were one of the many couples that got married just to go on the tour. So they would, let's see, this focus mostly on the Giants. The Giants it wasn't entirely members of the Giants. Comiskey and McGraw, surprisingly, had a hard time finding people who wanted to go. For example, Christy Mathewson was very interested in going, but as they got closer and closer to Seattle and leaving on the Pacific, Christy Mathewson said, "I'm not going." The reason Christy Mathewson wasn't going was because he got seasick. Christy Mathewson got seasick taking the ferry to Brooklyn so he really didn't want to go on. So he really didn't want to go on a really nasty sea voyage. We had Chief Myers was also with the Giants. He left in California. The game in California featured a great deal, many of Chief Myers's tribe coming out to cheer him on. In Oxnard, California, Hans Lobert raced a horse around the bases. I mean, it's just an incredible cavalcade. On top of everything, they were joined by a film crew in California. The film crew filmed the very first sports documentary ever made. I found the director's notes, and even though the film has been lost, I've been able to recreate entire sections of what he filmed. Uh, so uh, it's an amazing story. It includes a bunch of Hall of Famers. Tris Speaker was there. Um, John McGraw, Christy Mathewson, um,
No, tomorrow night with
um,
Martin,
Christy Mathewson, um, John McGraw. It has a cavalcade of stars. Also Jim Thorpe, a Hall of Famer in football. The other thing that's interesting is the film crew was the cinematographer on the film crew was a 19-year-old man named Victor Milner. Victor Miller. He returned to Hollywood after the film was over, changed his last name to Victor Milner, and became a legend at Paramount. He won an Academy Award in 1934 for Cleopatra. So you had Academy Award winners, Oscar winners, Oscar winners, Hall of Fame winners, most valuable players. You'll never see a collection like this again. Basically, they started they barnstormed across the country. I'm trying to think of some of the highlights. Well, is there anything in particular you'd like to hear? I mean, any details you would like to hear about this? Because basically, everywhere they went around the world. It was amazing, their reception. They got to Japan and they were greeted by some Japanese who greeted them with a great big howdy. um, in um, in Rome, they toured the Colosseum. The film, I would love to get a hold of the film because it has so much interesting stuff. It's got film. The film director had um, Jim Thorpe wrestle other players on the floor of the Coliseum. Wouldn't you love to see that? um, we had in in Oxnard, California, which is now I'm sure if you've read The Glory of Their Times, Hans Lobert talks about running around the bases in his book Glory of Their Times, where he talks about we had oxtail soup for breakfast, ran around the bases. And I found out that not only did he get all the details right, but 60 years later, he remembered them to the detail, including the fact that the horse was ridden by a guy from Mexico who was all duded up for the occasion in black spangles. So we have John McGraw, who when we got to London, John McGraw, he realizes that he's talking too much. He even said it to the press because the British press was not that impressed with John McGraw. They thought that he was a blowhard, that he was over opinionated, that he was basically the ugly American writ large. Let me do more chronological. They played everywhere from Blue Rapids, Kansas, to San Francisco. They played in Chicago, went to St. Louis, marched all across the United States, playing in every town. They played in Marlin, Texas, which of course was the Giants' spring training ground. They went to California where they played, and they had a day. Like I said, they had an afternoon and a morning and afternoon doubleheader. Morning game in Oakland. Everybody gets in the ferry, goes to San Francisco for the afternoon game. They're going to have another one of those to end the tour. They're going to have one in San Francisco, in Seattle, and Vancouver. But they decided to not play the game in Seattle because they decided the weather wasn't good enough in Seattle, so they didn't play the game. They didn't play the game in Vancouver, which upset a lot of Canadians. there, this was John McGraw had the idea for this tour. He had actually been sent early on in his career by the Baltimore Orioles to go over to Europe to see if the old Orioles of the 1890 Orioles could do a tour of Europe. He went and concluded it was too late for them to go over, but that always planted it in his mind. And his plan had been before the Orioles had planned to go before Spalding did, and so they really wanted to outdo Spalding. Roping in Comiskey made sense because Comiskey was the wealthiest guy in baseball. They also brought in to run the tour. They brought in a guy who had run circuses and knew how to make things move and get things done. We had Charles Comiskey went along with his son Lou Comiskey, John McGraw, Blanche McGraw, Jimmy Callahan, Josephine Callahan, Jimmy Callahan's wife, Joe Benz, Jack Bliss, William Bull, Wahoo Sam Crawford, the Hall of Famer, Turkey Mike Donlin had come out of retirement to join this tour. Jim Thorpe, Mickey Doolin, Laughing Laurie Doyle, Red Faber, right? Joe Farrell, and a lot of other folks, including John McGraw's personal priest. But as I said, it was often called the Honeymoon Express because a great deal, many of players delayed their wedding so they could go on the world tour. What that required was they put up $500. They put up $500 to hold their spot on the tour, but they got that back as soon as they agreed to sign up. So as soon as they joined up, they got their $500 back, which served as spending money for the tour. In Sri Lanka, they had dinner with Sir Thomas Lipton, the richest man in the world. Yeah, the guy on the tee box. And in Egypt, they met the last Khedive, who was the last indigenous ruler of Egypt. They went and got their picture taken in front of the pyramids, in front of the Sphinx. They got their pictures taken in the Colosseum in Rome. Everywhere they went, they played ball while the women went shopping, which is not surprising. Let me see. It is hard to put ourselves in the mindset of the 1913, 1914 world. What is really fascinating is, though, by the time the players got to Europe, they were getting American newspapers, and they realized that the Federal League had all made them a lot wealthier than they were being made. They could be making a lot more money for the Federal League than they were making for the teams they were currently playing for. This led to bad feelings. At one point, Tris Speaker was accused of being a Federal League agent by Jimmy Callahan in Paris. The Federal League actually sent agents to Europe to try and recruit the players from the World Tour while they're still in Europe. Excuse me. When they came back to the U.S., Federal League agents showed up at the dock with cards that they gave the players. They let Tris Speaker to a hotel room where they literally opened a suitcase full of money and said, "This is yours if you sign with the Feds." Tris Speaker said, "I gave Lannon, the owner of the Sox, I told him I would listen to his offer before I accepted yours. To keep him, the Red Sox made Tris Speaker the highest paid athlete in the world." He was making something like $100 a game in 1914. It's astounding. It was Jim Thorpe, as I said, was on the tour. He was, without a doubt, the single most important part of the tour and the reason it was successful. it was almost overwhelming sometimes. They're in the Philippines. The band is playing the Liberty Bell March. The crowd is yelling Thorpe, Thorpe, Thorpe. They get to England. Everybody knows who Jim Thorpe is. They're in Rome. Everybody knows who Jim Thorpe is. They're in Hong Kong. All the newspapers want to talk about Jim Thorpe. They know who Jim Thorpe is. It is and the reason, and and so it almost came overwhelming for the other players, because it's like, we're here too. It's not just Jim Thorpe. Let me see. I would say that the tour also made a lot of money. By the time they probably made about $100,000. They made a ton of money before they left the country, and whatever they made overseas was just gravy on top of that. I haven't been able to find out exactly how much they made, but they did very well indeed, which is also quite interesting, because it was a tour where they made money, because John McGraw and Carl Comiskey knew how to make money. There were lots of incidents. Larry Doyle and his wife were honeymooners along with the Thorpes. They became very good friends. In fact, years later, I talked to Jim Thorpe's daughter, and she said that Iva was still friendly with the Doyles all those years later. There were they played in Texas. They played in Texas. In one town in Texas, a crowd came out just to greet the train. They didn't play there. They just came out to greet the train as it passed. Now, and as I said, the Federal League was starting up all the time while they're out of the country. And so let me see. Let me sorry. There are, for example, now, unfortunately, like I said, every square frame of the footage has been gone. I think I found one frame to the movie. I was watching the movie Rhubarb, and I swear it matches up to a picture I saw of the tour. But I have to get a copy of Rhubarb and confirm it. If you want to say how were the Giants received around the world, it is the Giants certainly won because they had Jim Thorpe along. There were probably the biggest comedian on the tour, though, was oh God. Sorry. Just slip my tongue. We had Turkey Mike Donlin coming out of retirement. Oh boy. Bill Clem was the umpire. And now it's interesting that they let the National Commission decide who the umpire was. So they get the umpires were Bill Clem, who of course argued with McGraw all the time. In fact, he threw him out of the game in San Francisco. On the other hand, Comiskey ended up with Bill Sheridan as the umpire, who was very good and very good friendly. Sheridan is an interesting character. He was a undertaker in the off season and a umpire during the baseball season. He said, I carry them out in the off season and throw them out during the regular season. In Egypt, he got so wrapped up in the funeral aspects of the mummies that he missed the ship. He missed the ship and didn't show up until they were in Italy. He actually missed the ship to Sri Lanka. Who are some? Oh God, I'm sorry. I am more nervous than I should be. I've talked about this many times. if you can imagine, this is the tour that you could imagine yourself playing, doing if you were a kid. We're going to go around the world and we're going to play baseball and we're going to make money at it. We're going to bring along Tris Speaker. We're going to bring along Red Faber. We're going to bring on as many people as we can. It was not a lot of Giants who go. It wasn't a lot of Giants who went, or a lot of White Sox who went. As I said, Comiskey and McGraw had trouble.
James, you're muted.
The players, a lot of the players didn't want to go because it's 6 months a glory ride that's going to be extolling the virtues of McGraw and Comiskey, and they came back and literally went straight to spring training. They came home to had two blowouts. There was a blowout in New York and a blowout party in Chicago. Right after that, they went straight off to spring training. So you were literally playing baseball for the entire year. We had Gus Axelson was the reporter for the New York Times. We also had a reporter for the Sporting News went along, and it was front page news everywhere. I found all kinds of information, all kinds of stuff in all the back pages of the various newspapers. I would get the microfilm from the small town, read it a week in advance, read it a week behind. Among other things, I found the plot line to the movie, which, as I said, is a lost movie. Nobody knew what the movie was about. And I found in a San Francisco paper an account of the filming of the movie, which is called World Tour Giants and White Sox 1914. It is a lost film. If you go to the IMDb, however, you will see that there is a summary. And the summary was the director of the film, who was an actor, who was also an actor, played a fan of the Giants who decides he's going to follow his team around the world. And in the various places he follows the team around the world, he keeps getting thrown out of the stadium, so he never actually sees the games. So the director later became as an actor. He was the director of the movie. Started making movies for Thomas Edison, and he ended up as Hollywood's choice to play Abraham Lincoln. He played Abraham Lincoln 6 times on the big screen, and something that no other actor is ever going to achieve. I haven't seen any of his movies, but I have heard his voice on an old replay of the Lux Radio Theater. They did a replay of one of the Shirley Temple movie where he played Abraham Lincoln. So I heard his voice. He plays Abraham Lincoln on the radio as well. As I said, the big story is also the Federal League. As these players are, I mean, they are spending, they go across the Pacific. They stop in Australia. They play all the way across Australia. When they get to Australia, they start getting American newspapers. Tris Speaker is held overboard by his feet while he reaches out and grabs the mailbag off the dock. They play all the way across Australia, and among the talk was Turkey McDonald was in consideration for starting a professional league in Australia. All the players fell in love with Australia. Jim Thorpe loved Australia. John McGraw loved Australia. Turkey McDonald was so impressed with Australia that he actually talked with some local Australian entrepreneurs about starting a professional league in Australia. The idea being you bring some Americans over to seed the project, and then you can play, and then you can have a real league start in Australia. Of course, the Australian leagues don't start till the 1950s. And the reason this never happens and why Turkey McDonald never goes back to Australia is because of World War I. But the Australians were the only place where they went where baseball was familiar. For reasons no one knows, the cricket teams decided that their off-season sport, their off-season activity, when they weren't playing cricket should be baseball. In fact, the guy who invented the curveball in Australia, the first cricketer to throw the curveball, what learned it on the baseball field and then took it to the cricket field. So, so, so that is why when they went to Australia, they actually found fans who knew what they were doing, other than Japan, of course. And of course in Japan, they played in Japan, they played in Tokyo, and they played in Nagasaki. What's interesting about this is when they got to Nagasaki, the director spent a lot of money, greased a lot of palms, and he was able to take movies of the recoaling of the ship, of the coaling of the ship in Nagasaki. Now this was unusual because the coaling was done entirely by women with baskets on their heads who would take hours filling the ship one at a time, like ants climbing up the ropes and depositing the coal and coming back down. And it was considered very shameful that women were doing this work, which is why the Japanese would not allow it to be photographed. But the director was able to get his film, is able to film on the streets and everything else. If you're interested in the Japanese chapter, Saber just came out with a book on the tours of Japan. The book, my chapter on Japan, was excerpted in that, and is available to read. And that talks pretty much about what they did in Japan. The players love Japan. John McGraw was of the opinion after they played the Japanese teams that if the Japanese had a pitcher of the caliber of a big league pitcher, that they quite probably would have won the game. In fact, the Japanese scored first. They didn't score again, but they scored first. The Japanese were really apologetic. They said, "We're sorry about the conditions of our fields." He said, "No problem." They were skin fields, which basically means they were all sandlots. There was no grass in the infield. But other than that, the Japanese were very good fans, loved the game, loved the players. And here again, I have a story from a Japanese newspaper, where I had a Japanese student. I used to work at the University of Delaware. I had a Japanese student translate the kanji for me, and it talks about John McGraw, and it says John Comiskey, a daunting looking gentleman with the diamond in his tie. And interestingly, drawn that day is a bunch of characters from the game, caricatures. The biggest caricature is Bill Clem, because he was a huge hit with the Japanese. They loved the sound of his voice. He had a really deep sepulchral voice, which could be heard from all parts of the stadium. And of course, he was John McGraw's least favorite umpire. Although he was also quite impressed with the tour too. When they got to England, he came off the ship with a walking stick and a great walking stick, a coat. He went all out. It is, and I think the best quote of it all is from Brantlin Rice, who said, he's a bit of doggerel that went, in our phantasmagorical, in our dreams, we could imagine going on a tour around the world. And we could imagine playing in front of dukes and earls and counts and so forth, but not in our most phantasmatical nightmares, imagining could we come home to discover 3 rival leagues trying to give us all the kale we could carry away with us. Because all the players ended up with higher salaries, except for Jim Thorpe, who was getting $6,000 a year. Jim Thorpe's salary was not that far away from Ty Cobb's. Gives you an idea of how valuable John McGraw thought Jim Thorpe would be. He paid Jim Thorpe $6,000 a season. Tris Speaker was getting $8,000 a season. So he really expected big things from Thorpe. And Thorpe played very well on the tour. He played really well. The problem is Thorpe basically sabotaged himself. Thorpe, as a free agent, when he lost his medals, he became a de facto professional and was therefore a free agent. Many teams gave him offers. The St. Louis Browns offered him a starting position. Instead, he decided to sign with the Giants, knowing he would never be anything more than a bench warmer. But his rationale was, I figure a man could learn a lot on the bench from the New York Giants than he could playing every day with the Browns. I don't know whether that's right or not, but he certainly did. It certainly did. It certainly did end up. It, I don't know if he's right about that or not, but it is interesting to think about. And as a Giant, he had a few hurrahs as a Giant, but his really great play as a Giant was on the tour. As I said, Tris Speaker went. He in Blue Rapids, Kansas, they put up a board, and Christy Mathewson threw a baseball through the board. Now, of course, the board, it couldn't have been as thick as they claimed it was. Over time, that certainly expanded, but it's interesting that he was able to do stuff like that. And it's the only time. The tour is also the only time that Christy Mathewson and Walter Johnson faced each other. Walter Johnson became a member of the White Sox for one day, and they faced off against each other in Joplin, Missouri. Now, it turns out that by this time, the big train was. It turned out by this time the Big Six was pitched out, and basically Walter Johnson had a cakewalk, and Christy Mathewson just was out of his stuff by then. But it is fascinating. It's the only time they ever met. They never met in an all-star game. They never met in an exhibition game, except for this game here. There were so that is also another little footnote to this tour. They were in Oklahoma. They were in Tulsa. They were in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and the stands collapsed. Some soldiers were marching in, and the stands collapsed. One soldier was killed. There was a delay of only a half hour, and they played the game. Then nothing stopped. The mania that the people had for these games is just phenomenal. The fact that someone died. Nope, we're going to play the game. And the conditions were miserable. They played a game in the rain in Seattle. It was a farcical game, but there were so many fans, they felt that they simply could not turn them down. They would have played in China in similar weather, but it just got too bad in Shanghai. And they left a huge amount of disappointed people in Shanghai because all the Americans in China had showed up for the game. The British were there. They played in Hong Kong. And here I had to do some real research because the players weren't honest about where they played. They said they played in Sleepy Hollow. There is no such place called Sleepy Hollow in Hong Kong. Where did they play? I had to dig through some old maps. Where they played was near a graveyard. They didn't want to mention that because they're superstitious ball players. So they called it Sleepy Hollow instead. There they played in front of an audience of a few American soldiers, sailors, and a lot of British sailors who had never seen a baseball game before, and they thought that a really well hit foul ball was a good hit because there is no foul territory in cricket. You hit the ball behind you, it's still in play. So they cheered foul balls. They didn't understand the rules. They had arguments in the stands. In Oklahoma, there were a bunch of cowboys watching the game. It really did bring out the whole cross section of America. We had rich people, poor people. Everybody came out to see the Giants. And I mean, like I said, the Giants' first game in San Francisco, first meeting of the big train and the Big Six. It was a phenomenon that will never be repeated. In fact, in 1924, the Giants and White Sox decided they were going to do it again. They got only as far as Paris and said, "We're done." The tour was summarily abandoned. They at this point, baseball had really changed. It's ironic that during the Black Sox scandal, when things were falling apart for Comiskey, he referred to the tour as his crowning moment. He said, um, all I ever wanted was to do what I did with John McGraw and bring baseball to people on the other side. So even in the midst of the Black Sox scandal, the tour was Comiskey's finest hour and his biggest moment. For John McGraw, it was also the key to bigger and better things. In a few more years, he's gonna become part owner of the Giants. And as it was right now, he was now, despite what you've heard, this is not the tour where John McGraw met George Bernard Shaw. That was actually the 1924 tour, which disappointed me because I really wanted to include that quote about John McGraw being the quintessential American in my book, but I couldn't because it happened 10 years later, and it would have been cheating. Just now, do you guys have any questions? I mean,
Yeah, why don't we open it up to questions? James, first of all, the book, it's available on Amazon.
yeah.
Perfect. I'll start the question. How many countries during this time did they go to?
They went to they went to the United States. They left from Canada. They didn't play in Canada, but they left from Canada. Went to Japan, China, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Egypt, Italy, France, and England.
All right.
Hey,
Couple more questions for you. What made, this is so, over 100 years ago. What made you delve into this?
Well, I was doing a research project for Kevin Crane. He's a English professor at the University of Delaware. He did the book The Dollar Sign on the Muscle, which is the inside of scouting, what they look for. You have the dollar sign on the muscle. And he sent me up to do a project. He was doing a book called The Hurlers, which is the history of pitching. While I was up in the Hall of Fame, I found a clipping about this tour. I said, "This is really interesting." I took it back to Professor Crane. I said, "Isn't this fascinating?" He said, "Yes," because I had never heard of the tour. I mean, I thought I knew everything about baseball, and I had not heard about the tour. And so I kicked around for maybe finding a co-writer. I said, "No, if this story's going to get told, I'm going to have to do it myself, and I'm going to have to do it through firsthand sources." So I used every daily newspaper from them. I used Australian newspapers, British newspapers, every kind of newspaper across the United States. And like I said, even had Japanese newspapers translated for me.
And my last question is, we have Dennis Snelling on. Dennis wrote a book about Lefty O'Doul. Did this encourage Lefty O'Doul to go to Japan this tour?
It may have. One of the players had been on a tour before. Jack Bliss, who was I think with the White Sox on the time. He had been on a previous tour of Japan in like in a previous tour of Japan. And of course, this is the stuff that happens to authors. I get a call one day from someone who has found Jack Bliss's personal diary in a bookstore in California. And of course, I confirm, I'm confirmed that, yeah, this is that. And of course, he sells that. The person who finds this sells it at auction for lots of money. What do I get for being the guy who made his book valuable? Absolutely nothing. But yeah, it quite possibly it did. None of the players went back to Japan, as far as I know, other than like I said, Jack Bliss, who was on a minor league squad at the time, came up. He joined the White Sox for the tour, and he is the only one that had previous exposure to Japan.
Thank you so much. We got to box up your laugh. It's incredible. Mars, you're up.
Oh, well, thank you, James, for joining us. I have one little anecdotal statement and a couple of questions. Did you know that the Padres and Cardinals played at the Roma Coliseum?
No.
They
Oh
certainly
yeah,
did.
the fathers. Yeah, the fathers. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well,
But
they
my legitimate questions are, uh, but my legitimate questions are, what San Francisco ballparks in 1912 did the Giants play that game? And what was the name of the ballpark in Oakland? And what were the name of the teams?
yeah. Well, San Francisco was home of the had a Pacific Coast League team. Let me see what the ballpark was. I actually have. Let me see. I actually have the list of the ballparks.
Was it the Solons?
Yeah, yeah. It was. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. They were. They were both in this. They were in the Pacific Coast League. Let me see here. Would you know is the question I want to answer to? Yeah. They. Let's see. What was the Pacific Coast team? What was, let me see. Let me do a quick search here. Uh,
Well, to maybe help you out a little bit, I know that there was a team called the Mission Reds that played at 15th Valencia, but prior to that, they played at Ewing Terrace, which is
no,
in
it was
San Francisco.
the Seals.
Go ahead.
There. No, San Francisco. 82 to 88 here.
See, I have the name of some ballparks. One was at Ewing Terrace, which is like Geary and Masonic, where it was so windy and foggy. They only played there one season. And I know they played at 15th and Mission at Rec Park. And then I don't know what the name, if that was the Mission Reds.
The
And then there
Oakland Oaks
was
played
the,
in the Oakland Oaks played in Oaks Park. They played the game. They played the morning game in Oakland in Oaks Park. Um,
and Oaks Park, by the way, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, was in Emeryville.
yeah, yeah.
So when they in 1912 did they played it at 15th and Mission? Uh, do you have that information?
No, they played in Aging Oaks Park because the new Ewing Field would open in 1914. So they were in the last year of the Oaks Park, and then the Oaks moved to Ewing Field in 1914.
Yeah, Ewing Field I think only lasted 1 year because it was so windy and foggy. That's a Sears building was there years ago, and there's a little shopping center there, but it's so cold and windy. When so in 1914 they were at Ewing Terrace.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, and again in the Oakland ballpark, where was that?
I'm not sure where it was physically. You know,
Were they
it was,
called the Oakland Oaks?
they were called the Oakland Oaks. Yeah,
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
yeah. Now let's see. Yeah, this is the game when everybody got thrown out because Bill Clem tossed John McGraw and he tossed out Mike Donlin. And this is McGraw did not have anything particular to kick about, but the accumulation of rain and train service yesterday worked on his nerves and he took it out on the ump. And this is also the game where Mickey Dolan got kicked out and where there was a game Mickey Dolan got kicked out. It was Buck Weaver, a later of the Black Sox scandal. Buck Weaver went as a member of the White Sox, and Buck Weaver got kicked out of the game. And got a quote from the press that said, "If the women had heard his exclamation, there would have been a great deal of horrors." So he basically told the umpire to go F himself. And
Yeah, of all the books I've had, I had this information somewhere, but I didn't at hand. I didn't have the dates where in which ballpark they played and what the teams were on the year you specified.
yeah, they did. Well, they played in Oaks Park, and that was the last year for Oaks Park. And then Ewing Park, which Callahan said was a really beautiful park, but it only lasted 1 year. Yeah. But yeah, it would. I mean, you imagine a morning afternoon doubleheader, a morning game in Oakland, and then everybody gets in the ferry and gets to San Francisco, and it's mind boggling.
So they never returned to the Bay Area after that for
No.
any type of exhibition games.
Nope. As far as I know, this is the first time they were in San Francisco. It's kind of interesting foreshadowing. they played in Los Angeles as well. A lot of movie people showed up in Los Angeles. They played in San Diego. You know, they uh, they they played all across the whole every place they played in California has a major league team today. Every place they played out west, they played in Seattle. Well, not every place. They played in Medford, Oregon, which of course doesn't have a team. But they got to Oakland, they got to Seattle, and Seattle presents them with this giant cake, you know, and the players are like, "We're not going to eat this. No, you just starved, you just fed us a beast." So they take this cake with them. What does this cake do? It goes around the world with them, and they cut it in half when they get to New York, and half of it is eaten in San Francisco, in Chicago, and half of it is eaten in New York.
One last question. Did any of the Bay Area teams have affiliations as like perhaps before there was an actual farm system? Do they have any affiliations from bringing up ball players from those Bay Area teams in that year?
Well, they did because one of the players was from Oxnard, California. Who was that? Which players from Oxnard, California? Anyway, that brought out that he brought a lot of people out to. He brought a lot of people through his affiliation. They got players from all over the place. One of the players won on the tour wasn't even a major leaguer or a minor leaguer. He was a guy named Andrew Slight, who was an amateur player who had played with the Logan Squares, which was a team that Jimmy Callahan managed. And then he was going to go into their minor league system after the tour. He went on the tour, came home, and he injured himself in his first game, so he never got his crack at the majors. But he played very well on the tour, and he was also an opera singer. So when they get to Paris, they look up Sammy Strang, the old New York Giant, who is now an opera star, and he finagles this guy an audition in Paris with his conservatory, and they tell him, "Give up baseball. You should be an opera star."
Well, before Casey Stengel went to the New York Giants, did they get him from Oakland?
Not sure where they got Stengel from. Yeah,
Right.
didn't he go? Yeah. I'm not
I
sure where
mean,
they got Stengel from. Sorry.
I know he was studying to be a dentist.
Yeah.
Thank you, James.
All
Yeah.
right,
I mean,
Paul, you are up.
yeah.
Yeah, James, hi. Thank you very much. That was a great story. My two questions. The first one is, how many baseball games did they end up playing when they went on
Okay.
this?
Yeah, that I can tell you. It was let me see here. It was let me see. Oh gosh, I should have had that right. I should have written it. There's a number I should have off there. They played 22 games against each other, and then they played no, they played sorry, they played 25 games from Cincinnati to Oakland. They played 25 games, and let's see. Actually, yeah, their last game in the U.S. was game number 31 in Portland, Oregon. They were going to have a morning afternoon doubleheader in Tacoma and Seattle, but they said no, we're not doing it because it's rain and we're all tired. We've been on the road for 3 months. And then they ended up, the grand total of games is 46. But there's a couple that are a little bit different. There are, when they got to in Tokyo, they not only played against each other, but they combined themselves. The Giants and White Sox combined as one team and played KO University. Um, and then when they went to Sydney, Australia, the White Sox played New South Wales, and the Giants played New South Wales in Sydney, Australia. And then in Melbourne, the Giants played Victoria, the local team, and then so they played 8 games against other teams or as combinations, and they played 46 games by themselves. So 46 grueling games, and there would have been 48 or more without the
Okay.
rainouts. There would have been 50 games.
Okay. And what was the name? What was the reference to the actor that played Lincoln?
Oh yeah, Gus Axel's not the director of the movie.
Okay.
Let's see here. The director of the movie. Let's see. Let's see here.
Wasn't Walter Houston, was it?
No, it wasn't. No.
The actor that played in the Shirley Temple movie, if it's The Littlest Rebel, was Frank McGlynn Sr.
That's it, Frank McGlynn. Yeah, Frank McGlynn.
Wow.
Frank
Senior.
McGlynn
Yeah,
Senior.
he played Lincoln on the screen in the 30s and 40s, and
Yeah,
then
Frank McGlynn Senior. This was
or earlier.
yeah. He made the movie.
Really? Oh,
They
cool.
got some incredible footage. Yeah, he'd struck out as a film director, so he moved to acting, but he had started making
Okay.
movies for Thomas Edison, and now
Okay.
he was one of the first wave to go to California. And like I said, the cameraman was Victor Miller, who became Victor Milner and became a legend at Paramount Studios.
Okay. Great.
So yeah,
Thank you,
yeah.
Paul. Bill
Thanks,
Schiffner.
James. Thank you.
Bill,
Thank you.
you're up.
Yeah, thanks, James. Very interesting and everything. Obviously, with World War II, that was probably the reason they didn't go through Austria or Germany, anything, or at
World
that
War
point,
One.
right?
Yeah, well, they actually, they were World War One. Tensions were heating
World
up.
War I, excuse me.
Yeah, but they actually, when they went from Italy to France, they rode in a German craft, a German ship, and they really enjoyed the German service. They didn't like the British food they were on the British ships. They were they really complained about the food on the British ships they had to serve on. But they
So
liked the
would I.
German food and they liked the German crews.
But would they had to go through the different governments to have
Yeah. They got to Hong Kong, and there's a yellow flag hanging up indicating that there's diphtheria or something. So all the players had to get inoculated. And the pitcher that day insisted he get his injection in his leg rather than his pitching arm, so he could be free for pitching. In Italy, the ship in Italy, the train almost went over a chasm.
Wow.
The train was loaded with everybody, and suddenly they see some Italian trainmen waving the flags. They stopped the flag, and the tracks had gone. So if they'd gone any further, everybody would have been killed.
Lost our
It's
team.
amazing. They almost died going across the Pacific because the ship almost sank. They
Yeah.
almost died in Italy. The other story that I really wanted to mention was John McGraw met one of the players from his old Baltimore Orioles days who had become a doctor and was a doctor in the Philippines. So it was the last time they ever saw each other. He had become a doctor after he had during the Spanish-American War. He had walked off of the staff of the Orioles into a recruiting center, and he became a doctor in the U.S. military. And he went to the Philippines, and it's the last time John McGraw saw him. And he made sure he was the last person he saw. He climbed a tower to make sure he was the last person John McGraw saw when he pulled out of the Philippines. By that time, he was a doctor who owned several hospitals, and it was Kehoe, I believe. Was it not Kehoe? Yeah. Anyway.
Thank you,
Oh,
Bill.
Anyway, just one last thing. Maybe look at this as a screenplay.
I
From a
would
historic
love,
standpoint.
yeah. I mean, it's got the movie within a movie idea. I mean, the idea that and you've got Tris Speaker, you've got Buck Weaver. Buck Weaver turned a triple play in Egypt. Not unassisted. He could have been an unassisted triple play, but he started a triple play in Egypt, which and that's made the list of odd places triple plays have been played. I mean, I know I mumbled a bit. My book is actually pretty good, and it does tell a story that literally had not been told before in 90 years. It's just a catalog of events. It's opened up a lot of doors for me. It's been quoted in a lot of places. It's quoted in the latest Jim Thorpe biography. In fact, he came here to talk to me about the tour. It is an event that I didn't imagine it would be this big. Like I said, I just saw this. I thought that's like an interesting story, and the deeper I got, the more interesting it became. You know, all sorts of things like I am going to turn it into a kid's book because the Callahans brought their two kids, a boy and a girl who were like 8 or 9 years old. And they were, he became the bat boy at the game in London. So there's a picture of them all lined up at the game in London with Jimmy Callahan's son in his uniform as the bat boy. And they were the only ones free of seasickness while they're going across to Japan. The kids are running around the ship. Yeah, everybody else is throwing up. It would make a great screenplay. I would love. I mean, I don't know how to write a screenplay, but it would make a great one. The idea you've got an Academy Award winner there, you've got a director there, you've got Hall of Fame players. Chief Myers, John McGraw, Christy Mathewson, Turkey Mike Donlin. I mean, Turkey Mike Donlin coming out of retirement to do this, and Mike Donlin was true to form. While they're going across the ship, he's romancing this woman, and she thinks, "Oh yeah, I'm in with Turkey Mike Donlin," and then he promptly dumps her and starts this near riot on the ship. It's and I almost end with let me I think I should end with what I end with here. I think I'm gonna end with my afterword.
James, before you end, we got one
Yeah.
last question from John.
Okay.
John, go ahead.
Okay, James, thank you for joining us. My question has to do with Jim Thorpe. I read the biography of Thorpe, and it does a nice job of talking about his experiences on the trip. And it points out he did do well when they played on the trip.
Yeah,
and he did well in spring training all
Right.
the time. But yet McGraw never played him.
Yeah.
And at the end of his career, he gets traded to Boston Braves, and he does well there. Do you have any insight or opinion on what did McGraw misuse Jim Thorpe?
I think McGraw did. I think McGraw expected him to be like Chief Myers, quiet, understated, dignified. Jim Thorpe was loud and opinionated, and he was very good, but John McGraw, they bristled up a bit on the tour. John McGraw lectured Thorpe, said he shouldn't spend time drinking, he should spend time with his new wife, blah blah blah. They ended up not coming to blows or anything, but McGraw felt differently about Thorpe after the tour than he did before the tour, which is why he chose to not play him in the 1914 season. All during the tour he's talking him up, but something happened. I don't know exactly all the details, but something happened, and he lost his enchantment with Thorpe, and he also started that rumor that Thorpe couldn't hit the fastball, which is a bald-faced lie.
Yeah, my father used to tell me Thorpe couldn't hit the curveball.
No, that's not true. And of course,
Right.
remember, Thorpe is the hero in the greatest baseball game ever thrown. Archie Vaughn, the Archie Vaughn,
Yeah.
the dual no hitter. Jim Thorpe breaks that up. The single
Yeah.
greatest game ever played. Jim Thorpe is the hero.
Yeah, I think Thorpe could have been a decent ball player if he was given a chance.
Had he decided to take the deal and play with the Browns, who knows what he could have done.
Yeah.
If he had played every day, he could have become a great player.
I know the reason why they bickered. He ordered Thorpe to bunt, and Thorpe hit a home run, and McGraw fined him.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah.
James,
Yeah.
do you want to?
Okay.
You said you wanted to read something to wrap it up.
Yeah. I just want to sum up basically. The afterword is 1924. A decade after Comiskey and McGraw's triumph, the World Tour, the event as an event had already been lost to obscurity. The rise and demise of the Federal League, the Great War, and Prohibition had driven the few memorials of the war to the back pages of the nation's sports sections. Comiskey and McGraw decided to memorialize their triumph and restored it to the public consciousness by going on tour again. The 1924 tour possessed a far less ambitious itinerary. The two teams planned to go only as far as Europe, Ireland, Scotland, England, France, Belgium, Germany, and Italy were the scheduled destinations. Sports writers used the same terms as they had a decade before. Time magazine referred to the teams as missionaries and continued the analogy. Instead of Bibles and hymn books, these missionaries will carry with them balls, bats, mitts. Instead of love and light, these missionaries will shed baseball fanaticism all over Europe. This tour, however, never caught on, either with the public or the athletes themselves. Poorly financed and ill-timed, the tour only got as far as Paris before being summarily abandoned. As Time put it in his follow-up coverage, they came, they saw, they gave it up. Neither Comiskey, McGraw, the White Sox, the Giants, nor the world was the same. The decade had been especially hard on Comiskey. After the pinnacle of a World Series championship in 1917 against McGraw's Giants and a return to the series after the Great War in 1919 came the Black Sox scandal. The ugly truth that some of the Sox had conspired to give the series to the Reds at the behest of gamblers broke late in the 1920 season with the White Sox locked in a tight pennant race. Comiskey tried to hold his championship team together even as his empire collapsed around him, alternating between support and condemnation for his players. Comiskey turned to memories of the World Tour for solace. I would rather close my ballpark than send 9 men to the field with one of them holding a dishonest thought towards clean baseball, the game John McGraw and I went around the world with to show people on the other side. By 1924, Comiskey had been permanently marked by the scandal. His Sox were perennial troglodytes, incompetently managed, and in financial disarray. Comiskey's men wielded a solid brass touch when it came to signing talent. Good money followed bad. Comiskey threw cash at one worthless prospect after another. This was not how Comiskey wanted to be remembered. It could all have turned out so differently. On 26 October 1931, Comiskey passed away in his paneled estate in Eagle River, Wisconsin, a tired, broken man with a shattered heart and $1 million estate. And then Lou Comiskey, who had honeymooned on the World Tour, took over the Sox upon his father's death. Far more of a fair dealer than his old man and possessing a better eye for talent, Lou had begun to reverse the White Sox long slide. Then, during the dark days of the Great Depression, he too passed away at the far too young age of just 54 years old. John McGraw had a wonderful year in 1924. The Giants returned to the World Series, where they were beaten by Walter Johnson and the Washington Senators in 7 games. The Giants were still kings of New York, but John McGraw saw the future of baseball just across the borough line in the Bronx, and he wasn't happy about it. Babe Ruth, who had hit his first professional home run in North Carolina on March 7th, 1914, ironically in the same ballpark where Jim Thorpe hit his first home run, the very day the Giants and tourists were celebrating their return to New York, was revolutionizing baseball. The Yankees had begun to eclipse the Giants, both on the field and at the gate. After decades as top dog, Muggsy was starting to know what second place felt like. Never again would he be on top, either in baseball or in the Big Apple. He would manage the Giants until 1932, but never again would he fly a pennant from the roof of the Polo Grounds. After returning home in March 1914, Jimmy Callahan returned to the leadership of the Sox, but the team came out of the gate flat, quickly disappearing into the second division. 2 weeks before New Year's Day, 1915, Jimmy Callahan was terminated as White Sox manager. Offered other managerial positions, Callahan could never restore the luster to his managerial reputation. During the post-tour years, he and Josephine were blessed with another son. Always active in scouting and other baseball-related activities, Callahan traveled widely and wove a large circle of friendship about himself, composed of folks from all stratas of life. In 1934, while in Boston paying his good friend James M. Cohan a visit, Callahan suffered a massive heart attack and passed away at 60 years of age. Most of his obituaries noted his status as one of the original White Sox of 1901 or his role as the team manager, slating his contributions to the World Tour. The comedian went on the tour is Germany Schaefer. By 1924, Germany Schaefer was dead. He died in 1919 of a hemorrhage in Saranac Lake, New York, while on a scouting assignment for the Giants. The first tourist to die, Schaefer was only 42 years old. It is said that John McGraw wept for the only time in public at Germany Schaefer's funeral. Christy Mathewson was dying in 1924. America's first sports idol had signed up too late to fight in the Great War, reaching Europe in 1918 after action was essentially over. Mathewson joined the Chemical Corps. He, along with Ty Cobb, was inadvertently gassed during a training exercise. The gas weakened the Big Six's lung, and he contracted tuberculosis. Never the same afterwards, he endured a long, painful convalescence. The weakened Matty managed the Reds and later assumed the presidency of the Boston Braves. In 1924, he suffered a relapse. After rallying for a time, Mathewson sought treatment in the sanitarium in Saranac, New York. On October 7th, 1925, Christy Matheson passed away at the very same sanitarium where Germany Schaefer breathed his last. Frank McGlynn struck out as a director in Hollywood. Although he had been quite successful in his work for Thomas Edison, he was unable to compete with talents like D.W. Griffith. He returned to his first love, acting. Between 1919, when he first assumed the role as the lead in Abraham Lincoln on Broadway, until the rise of Raymond Massey, McGlynn was Hollywood's preferred choice to portray the 16th president. In 7 films from 1924 to 1939, McGlynn portrayed Abraham Lincoln. No other actor has portrayed the great emancipator in as many times on the silver screen. And here, Mike Donlin's return to Australia as a baseball player in the planned new league, professional league, was prevented by the Great War. Like Frank McGlynn, he turned to acting for his livelihood. After the 1914 season, Donlin relocated to California, where he had a steady but by no means significant film career. Usually cast as a heavy, he took occasional turns at comedy. He rarely looked back upon his baseball career. For Donlin, the Giants were really only the Giants when Matty was on the mound and when the cheers for Turkey Mike Donlin reverberated around the polo grounds. By 1924, Victor Miller had established himself as one of the best cinematographers in Hollywood. Shortly after the completion of the World Tour, Miller changed his last name to Milner and went on to become a legend at Paramount Studios. Miller's ability with the camera would ultimately be rewarded with the Academy Award for Cinematography in 1934 for Cleopatra. And then we have the other players. Steve Evans, who was one of the Steve Evans who was with the St. Louis Cardinals. He was one of the players who jumped to the Federal League, and he was not forgiven. Steve Evans discovered that his flashy jump to the Feds would not go unpunished. After 2 stellar years with the Brooklyn Tip Tops and the Baltimore Terrapins, Evans found himself unable to secure work in the majors. His prankster personality had at last worn out his welcome, leaving Evans as one of the few big league jumpers for whom the Major League's blacklist became permanent. And then Bill Clem insisted that he never made a mistake behind the plate. His umpiring skills would one day result in being enshrined in Cooperstown, but John McGraw never appreciated his talents. Clem's parting shot to McGraw was to throw him out of his final game as manager of the Giants. Buck Weaver was on a different sort of blacklist in 1913. Although some researchers have claimed Buck may have tried to warn Comiskey that the fix was in for the 1919 World Series, he was ignored. Weaver never took a dime from gamblers. He wanted no part of the fix, and he played his heart out in the series. His reward for having guilty knowledge of the fix was a lifetime ban from baseball. Despite several appeals to Commissioner Landis, the ban was upheld. Weaver's case stands as a monument to Judge Landis's egomania. Of the 8 Black Sox, Buck Weaver remains the only one about whom not a hint of scandal has been produced, yet he remains ineligible for admission to the Hall of Fame. Jim Thorpe's major league career was at an end in 1924. He would continue to play minor league ball until he was past 40, however. The star of Carlisle never quite fit into the Giants' mix, perhaps out of jealousy over Thorpe's fame or disappointment that the Native American was not a baseball Superman. McGraw poisoned the well. Though the Giants manager claimed again and again that Thorpe could not hit the fastball, any serious assessment of the record shows that claim is false. During his last season in the majors in 1919, he hit .333 with the Boston Braves. The highlight of his career, however, may have occurred in 1917 as a member of the Cincinnati Reds. On May 2nd, 1917, Archie Hippo Vaughn and Fred Toney pitched no-hitters against each other. Incredibly, each pitcher carried their no-hitter into the 10th inning. In the top of the 10th, Thorpe drove in the Reds' only run to win the game. Thorpe's hit ended what was probably the greatest one-day combined pitching performance in history. By 1924, Jim Thorpe's main interest, however, was not baseball but football. The first president of what would become the National Football League brought the professional game to and respectability and an audience it needed to survive. It really is no exaggeration to state that without Jim Thorpe, there would be no such thing as the National Football League today. Thorpe's personal life never matched his on-field glories, however. Always a hard drinker, he turned to the bottle even more after the death of his son, Jim Jr., during the influenza epidemic of 1919. His personal life and marriage never recovered from his blow. Eventually, Iva and Jim divorced. So bitter was the separation that Iva cut Jim's face out of virtually every photograph in the house and refused to talk about him for years. Yet, in spite of the rage she felt towards the man she had once called my Snooks, Ivor retained the diary that she kept during the tour, the treasured relic of a love and of an age and of places irretrievably lost.
Thanks so much, James. Why don't we
Benny,
give it
now
up
that
for
I'm unmuted-
Jay? What?
Now that I'm unmuted, I was before. Can I get one quick question in?
Yes, you can.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for this great presentation. How did they travel between the Far East and Europe?
By ship. They traveled
Where around the
yeah,
around the Cape of Good Hope?
yeah, no, they went to Australia. They traveled let me see. No, they went from the Philippines to Australia. And then from Australia, they went up to they went Australia, they went the Indian Ocean to Egypt, and then from Egypt they went to Europe.
You mean through Suez Canal? Must have been.
Yeah, they went through the Suez Canal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Let's give it up for James Elpers.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Don't be so
Yeah.
nervous next time. No reason.
Sorry.
Oh, stop, please. All right, we're gonna wrap it up here. We'll be off next week. If you're interested in James's book, Tour to End All Tours, it's on Amazon. You could get it there.
What I
And-
want to mention too, it won the Larry Ritter Award for the best book on the dead ball era, and it was the first runner-up for the Spitball Baseball Book of the Year.
Congratulations on that, James.
Yeah.
Don't
So
be a
it- so, yeah.
don't be a
and-
stranger to future Zooms, okay?
Yeah, it was also reviewed very favorably by USA Today. So it's done well.
All right, give it up for James
Thank
Elpers.
you.
Thank you, James. Thank you.
We'll hang around here if anybody wants to talk about, the project we might start involving ourselves.